Can we just all go ahead and say that streaming has made the entertainment industry very weird? Whether it's movies, music, whatever it is, it just makes things very odd. And this weekend is just another example of that. We have three large films coming out, or well, fairly large films, one of which is a family film called The Wild Robot. Then we have another film by esteemed director Francis Ford Coppola, Megalopolis, which is not being talked about a whole lot, not being advertised a ton. And then we have the third film, the one that I'm going to review today, which is Wolves, starring two of the biggest stars in the world, being George Clooney and Brad Pitt, directed by John Watts, who's done the Spider-Man movies. And this one also is not being talked about very much, and is just another continuation of kind of the failed streaming marketing aspect and just things getting thrown out to the internet to maybe be viewed or maybe not at home someday, one day. The whole thing is just weird, but I decided to go ahead and review Wolves, and I'm not sad that I did, and I'm really ready to talk about this movie, so let's go ahead and do this. As always, before we get started, go ahead and throw us that sub, go ahead, hit that button and give us a few comments, likes, all that stuff helps our growing channel a bunch. And then also make sure to visit criticless.com. We are an entertainment reviewing platform where you can review anything that you've been watching lately and just make some new friends and hang out and talk about whatever you've been enjoying. So make sure to do that. Now on to Wolves. Like I said, this movie is directed by John Watts, the guy who's done the most recent Spider-Man films that have been quite well received, and it seems like he's kind of pulling away from that franchise and from Marvel a little bit and starting to branch out more again on his own, which I don't think is a bad move. And this is starring pretty much nobody but George Clooney and Brad Pitt and one other person, Austin Abrams, who I was not familiar with until watching this, but he did quite a good job. Now, what it says the overview is a hired to cover up a high-profile crime, a fixer soon finds out his night spiraling out of control when he's forced to work with an unexpected counterpart. I don't think that's a bad breakdown for this movie, and it's a pretty good description of what's going on without spoiling too much of it, because this movie really does thrive on a quality story and just the performances given by the people, these big all-stars in this movie. And we've seen Brad Pitt and George Clooney work together before. This is definitely not the first time, so it's neat to see these guys back together again and really just out here showing what they've got and working with this quality story. Now, if you can't tell by the language that I'm using, I was actually quite pleased with this movie, and I was a little bit worried in the beginning because this thing's been out and about in the wild amongst the larger profile critics and such. I think it was probably at some of the film festivals, and some of the buzz that I saw was not great. Also, just seeing that it was coming to streaming on Apple Plus was a bit of a worry, because you've got these two stars and it's just a movie going to streaming, and this isn't the first time we've seen this, and it is a little weird. Sending something to streaming like this almost just feels like you're not fully confident in the movie. Now, granted, with our current box office situation, honestly, I guess it's not a huge surprise, because the smaller type of films that aren't these big spectacles don't seem to be really doing that well in the movie theater. So in a sense, I kind of can't blame them, but this is honestly the very first Apple TV or Apple Plus, whatever they're calling it these days. It's the very first film that I have seen that they've done, and they've put out quite a few, but this one had my attention the most because I am a big John Watts fan, and if you have not watched his other films, obviously the Spider-Man ones, like I mentioned, were quite well received. Another one that I want to talk about, though, is Cop Car. I would definitely advise you to check out Cop Car. We only have one person who's reviewed it, and honestly, it's not super popular, but it's what got him kicked off in the business as far as the director goes, and it stars Kevin Bacon, and it involves a stolen cop car, and it's quite good and honestly feels more in line with what he's doing with this film. The movie kicks off with a bang. It jumps things right out of the gate with Amy Ryan and a dead body, and her freaking out trying to find someone to fix her problem. Who does she call but George Clooney, who describes that he is the best at what he does, no one's better, and that's just the end-all be-all. But when George shows up, not long later, Brad Pitt waltzes in with the exact same description, playing the exact same part essentially and planning on doing the same job as him. They are just kind of a one for one. And that is really where the movie goes from there, is leaning into these two guys playing very similar characters, which on the surface you would think is not a great idea. And I was seeing that some of the complaints from the critics were that that was the decision. But I mean, that's the script and that's what they were going for here. And I actually think it works because these guys play well off each other. Now, the interesting thing is, I did not realize I had to go back and look as far as these guys' ages, how close they were, because I thought that Brad Pitt was younger, but these guys are only 3 years apart in age, so they're pretty close together, because I was expecting them to play George Clooney as the more kind of washed up, older, grizzled one, and then Brad Pitt, the younger, but really, that's just kind of been the stereotype due to how they look and their personas with the other films that they've played together, but really, they're very close together in age, and they play it more like that in this movie, which actually works. These guys that are fixing a problem, fixing this death and or murder, whatever it is that's going on, and they're forced to do it together, even though they're known as being lone wolves. There comes in the name of the film, Wolves, is that these guys are lone wolves in the profession. They're known for doing what they do very well by themselves. Now, most of this movie is not things that you have not seen before. This has been done, and it's been done multiple times as far as this type of a trope and what these guys do for a living, the hitman thing, or the, you know, cleaner, fixer, people who deal with gangs and murders and hiding bodies and working for the elite. You know, we've seen these kind of characters, but we've never seen it quite in this capacity where there are two competing forces of these types of people who aren't used to working with others. And that's where I was getting at with saying that it really does rely on the performances of these guys, and it very much does. Now, the one extra component here is Austin Abrams, who gets thrown into the mix and does quite a good job standing up against these two guys. I can't imagine being in a film and being basically the only other actor with these two dudes, because that would be a hard bit to follow with these two. We get a good ways into this movie before we really get to kind of the meat and potatoes of where they were going with this, outside of just kind of leaning into the comedy. Both of these guys do comedy quite well together, so I was all on board for that. As the film was going on, I was curious what the message was, the purpose, what the story was trying to tell or get at, and as it progressed, I kind of put things together and it really ended up resonating and hitting home for me fairly well. And I don't find this to be spoilers really, because I'm not giving anything away about the plot or what happens here. But when you think about the concept of lone wolves, I think a lot of us as humans really do kind of inwardly reflect and look at ourselves as kind of being alone quite often. And that is kind of what this movie capitalizes on, is this feeling of being alone, of doing things by yourself, but then realizing that you aren't the only person going through what you're going through, dealing with the things you're dealing with. And by the end of the film, I really felt like that was driven home and it worked well, and it actually resonated to where you just need to sit back and think sometimes like, yeah, this is crazy, this is wild, my life is X or Y, but I'm not really doing it alone. There is someone else out there going through these things, dealing with hard times, and it might not be the exact same, but it's close enough. And sometimes we just need to sit back, take a breather, and realize that I'm not the only one dealing with this. So at the end of the day, I feel like Jon Watts did quite an excellent job with this film. Is it the best thing of the year? No. But did I have a great time? Yeah. And do I think it's worth watching? Absolutely. This is an easy breezy watch. It's just fun to watch these guys bounce off one another. I would put this on a Criticless scale somewhere in the lower 80s, you know, right at that early most excellent range of like an 83 out of 100%. And we actually have 2 reviews already for this movie, and it sounds like both of them, with Banjo Sandwich giving it an 86 and Sinscore giving it an 85, right there with one another, and I'm not far off. I think that this is going to be kind of the general consensus from most regular folks, is that it's quite a good movie and it's a good sit. And for being on Apple TV Plus, not having to go to the theater and just hang out at home and watch a movie like this, I actually do think this is kind of the perfect place for this kind of experience. And I'd advise you to check it out if you have Apple TV Plus, or maybe if you're going to do the free thing and check out a few more things offered on Apple TV, because they do have quite a few very good shows And I've heard that some of the movies are good as well. So I would say if you were interested in this film, give it a go. Check out Wolves and let me know down in the comments below what you think, or if you're planning on watching it. And I really did have a great all around time, and I laughed quite a bit, which says a lot because comedy can be pretty difficult. And it was just great to see these two on the screen again. So I'd most definitely recommend. This is a most excellent for me. And I will be back again on Monday with the news. So you guys take it easy, and we'll see you next week.